welcome back to my channel. I am Nadine and I'm here to show you how you can start learning how to knit and make it super simple for you. I have been knitting since I was a teenager, but then I took a really long break from it. I'm not even sure why. And I rediscovered it during the pandemic, and ever since then it's just been my go-to for relaxation, for just being creative, having an outlet and just creating things that I love to wear. So I'm here to just help you do the same. I'm hoping that these video tutorials are serving you, that they're helpful to you. If you have any questions, you can always comment below the video with those questions, or you can come to my Instagram and just send me a DM there. I'm super happy to help you. This is definitely a passion of mine, and I'm inviting you to, make it one of your passions as well. So today we're going to talk about gauging and what it is, why we do it, how we do it, and everything else. So this is not going to be an actual tutorial to show you how to do it because it's pretty self-explanatory. What you do need is the stitches. So you're going to need a knit stitch, a purl stitch potentially. Those are probably the two that you're going to need the most. And the gauge is always done in the same pattern or stitch that your pattern is actually written in. So whatever the let me show you an example. Whatever your shirt ends up being, whatever the pattern of your shirt ends up being is usually what you are going to make the gauge in. So let's talk about what a gauge is and why we do it. So I brought some of my gauges here. I keep them. Actually, I don't keep them. I give them to my daughters because they like using them for little things. Like one of my daughters puts them like a little coaster under her plants, which is adorable, and my other daughter has little LOL dolls, so she uses them as blankets. It's really cute because you can really, you could unravel them and use the yarn again, of course, but again, they love them so much, so I just give them to my kids, which is cute. And now I have a bunch of them to show you. What you need to gauge. So you're going to need your knitting needles, you're going to need the yarn that you're going to use in your pattern. But normally, by the time you're ready to get started, you already have all that, right? Then you're going to need your pattern. I have a whole binder of patterns right here. I have also digitized them at this point because I use an iPad with an app called GoodNotes, and I can just notate on the pattern itself, and then you can erase it. It's very helpful. But otherwise, what I do on my patterns, and I'm trying to find one that I have used, is I just start writing on the paper and just make notes, count, to tally for my stitch count, for the rows that I'm counting. So there's lots of keeping track involved in knitting, as you may have figured out already by now if you have started knitting and started using patterns. But the pattern, like I said, either on a paper or on a digital version, is a really great place to just make your notes and have your tally. So in your pattern, you will see, so this is a pattern from We Are Knitters. It's a pretty small one, but you are going to see either a little picture right here that shows a little square, and that has the gauge, basically the measurements of your gauge written on them. Or if that's not the case, if you don't see that in your pattern, then you will see a part in your pattern that says gauge right here. They all look a little bit different, but they all will have a gauge part in them, and it reads something like this: 10 stitches and 13 rows will equal 4 inches or 10 centimeters on 9mm needles in stockinette stitch. Let me translate. What this means is you are going to knit 10 stitches, or you're going to measure 10 stitches in a row, and then it said 13 rows, so you're going to knit 13 rows. And when you're complete with those 13 rows and 10 stitches, you should have a little square that measures 4 inches or 10 centimeters, which is the same thing. The needles are 9mm, and the stitch is stockinette, which is this right here. Stockinette simply means knit stitch on one side and then purl stitch on the other side. This is highly likely the pattern that is used for the entire sweater in that pattern that I just showed you, which makes sense because you want to have a gauge that matches your pattern so that you actually know if you're knitting in the right gauge, okay? What's the point of this? Well, there is a slight chance that even if you're using the knitting needles that are recommended and the yarn that is recommended, that you have a little bit of an offset here, that it's slightly bigger or slightly smaller than what is recommended. And the reason for that is that people just knit a little looser and or tighter than other people, and it's all, you know, handmade, so there's no perfect science to this. But what it really is for is to show you if you're within the range of that gauge. So if you're just like a couple like inches off, not inches, you can't be off by a couple inches because you're measuring 4 by 4 inches. But if you're just a little bit off of that inch, I don't think it's a problem. It depends on what it is. So if you're knitting a scarf, I don't think it's a problem at all, because it just means that the scarf is either going to be a little bit bigger or a tiny bit smaller, but not very much. But when you are knitting something that is form-fitted, a shirt maybe, or a sweater, where, you know, the sleeves need to be a certain length, and, you know, over here the measurement needs to be a certain like size, then you might have to really kind of adjust what you're doing, and that's what you're doing, or that's why you're doing a gauge. So by knitting the gauge, it'll take you like 10 minutes at the most. You will save time in the long run, because if you skip gauging, especially for something that needs to fit you, you really might have a problem once it comes to the final piece, and it's either too small or too big, and it's just such a hassle and such a frustration that I would love for you to not even have to deal with. So do yourself a favor and take your time to make your little gauge, and, you know, see if you're a little off, and then you can adjust. So how do you adjust? When you, let me first show you how to measure this. Okay, so this is the tool that you're going to need. I'm going to link it up down below so that you can grab this too. It costs a couple dollars, but it's so much easier to use this than, you know, just using a ruler or a tape measure. And even though I have a very small one here, I recommend going a little bit further than what the pattern says. So in our case, it said 10 stitches and 13 rows. I would probably say 13 stitches and 16 rows, so that you're just a little bit bigger than your 4-inch measurement. And then when you're done, this one is actually bigger. I did make this bigger. I did make this bigger. I don't remember the actual gauge of this one, but now that I'm looking at it, because I remember this was correct, I can actually see right here. Okay, so you can see here, and then you are just simply going to count your stitches and your rows. Okay, and you know, I might show it to you on the close-up, just so I can show you how you actually count the stitches. That might be something for a different video. I'm gonna make it a separate video. Okay, so then you're gonna just count, and this is where your 4 inches are. So it's super easy to see in this window. You would want to lay it down flat and then start counting. And that way, you know if you're on or off gauge. So now let's talk about what happens if you are actually off gauge, because it does happen sometimes. What happens when you are off gauge and your needles, or I'm sorry, your stitches and your little square comes out bigger, meaning that you actually have less stitches within that little square than it's called for in the pattern. That's when you need to downsize, okay? Because it means that you are knitting too loose, or that something is too big, the needles are too big. Even though the needles may be the ones that you're supposed to use, I would try one needle size smaller and see what the gauge comes out then. You do the same thing the other way around. If you're having too many stitches within your little square, or too many rows, then it's called for. Then you want to upsize your needle, and then want to just knit it again and see if you can match the gauge. And that's the goal, is just to make cute little squares and match the gauge as much as you can. Again, it's not perfect. We're not going for perfection here. We're going for a handmade item, which will always have mistakes. I can show you this right here. So right there, I have a little mistake in here. I'm pretty sure I have another one, and I'm showing you this because also this is inside out, because I need to fix something on this. But this is what it looks like right here. It's adorable. But I'm showing you this because I don't think it needs to be perfect. And if you're a little bit off gauge, I really don't think it's a problem. It just makes the piece unique, it makes the piece yours, right? But I do say try to match it as close as you can, but don't sweat it if it's just a little bit off. So if you have any questions about gauging, I definitely will make a video where I'm showing you how to make a gauge. Just changed my mind on that because I feel like it is important to show you, and how to use this tool right here, and then count your stitches and count your rows. And I will put that up next week for you right here on this channel. So again, I hope this was helpful. If it was, please share with people that you know who also want to learn how to knit. Tell your friends about it, subscribe to this channel below, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching.